Today I'm going to do a demo about retrieving and updating data to the SQL server, and for this purpose I have divided my project into 4 parts. The first part would be to retrieve data from SQL database and show it on the data grid. The second step would be to create a navigation system for the data grid and at the same time bind the text boxes to the data. The third step would be to modify the data, and that is to apply the insert, update and delete commands and then update the database. And finally the last step would be to perform searches in the data and update the database. So the first video would be about just retrieving the data from the SQL database and show it on the data grid. So now let's move to the SQL server data management studio and see what kind of data we have over here. So over here we have database core information, and inside the information database we have a table called city data, and we could see the table over here. It have 4 columns: ID, name, city and phone, and a bunch of data. And now I would go to the Visual Studio and I would like to retrieve that data and bring it onto the data grid. And we could see I have already designed my form over here to save the time. So over here I have a bunch of text boxes and buttons. These text boxes, text box 1, text box 2, text box 3 and 4, these correspond to their specific columns in the database. For example, this one corresponds to the first column, the second one to correspond to the second, third one to the third, and the fourth one to the fourth one. I have a data grid over here which I call DG, and this is for to display the data. And then I also have a bunch of buttons to navigate through the data: the first, the next, previous and the last. And I also have buttons for to load the data, insert, update and delete the data. I would also add another button to update the database, like I forgot to add this one, but I would say button update. So this would update the data already there. So button database, and I would say I would call it update database, just update database. So this would be our file. Once we perform any queries, we have to press this button to perform the updation. So now let's go to the form, to the coding part, and first I would add the namespaces. So the namespaces required for this project would be using system.data.sql client, and then also I would now the classes I would need for this one would be SQL Connection. I would call the object as con, then SQL Data Adapter, call it ADP, and SQL Command Builder, I would call it CB. And then I would also need a data set for it, a class of data set. I would call the object as DS. Data table, I would call it DT, and data row, DR. And now I would create the instances of these classes inside the form load event. So I would say connection is equal to new SQL connection, and the connection stick I would use would be data source is equal to, my computer name is Solar, and then I would say initial catalog. This is my database name, which is information, and then I would say integrated security equal to true, and so that is my connection string. Then I would create the instance of adapter class. So I would say adapter equal new data adapter, SQL new data adapter. What's going on? SQL data adapter. And then I would create an instance of for the data set, say new data set. And now I would perform my select command. So I would say adapter dot select command equal to, I would create the instance of the SQL data adapter, say of the SQL command, and the command would be to select star from my table name is city data. Yep, city data, and the connection I would use is con. Now I would like to bring the data from the database and fill the data set using the adapter. So I would say adapter.fill, fill the data set and name it as my data. And then the next step would be to assign the data in the data set to the data table. So I would say data table is equal to dataset.tables, and the name of my table is my data. And then I would also assign something to the data row. I would say data row is equal to the data table, whatever is in the data table, and select row number first. That's the index would be 0. And if you want to understand this thing, I have created a diagram. So for example, we have these rows: row 1, row 2, row 3. We have 3 rows, and the data table, for the first step we did it like we brought the data set data into the data table. Now if I want to select a specific row, what I would do, I would say data row is equal to select the data table dot row, and this 0 shows the index. So if this is 0, this would mean the first row. If this is 1 over here, this would mean the second row, and if it's 2, then it would mean the third row. Similarly, after selecting the row, if I write is dr as the index 0, it would select the first column, and if I say dr1, it would select the second column. If I say dr2, it would select the third column, and the third one would select the fourth column. And the number of, to count the number of rows inside the data table, we could simply write as data table dot rows dot count. We would need that later on, so that's why I mentioned it over here. So now let's go back to our coding. So now what I want, the next thing I want is to put the data, to bind the data onto the data grid, or to show the data onto the data grid. So I would say data grid dot data source, data grid dot data source. Oh, sorry, what's going on? And that is the data in the data set. So I would say ds.tables, and the name of my table is my data. And that's it. Let's see if this runs well. I got the data. So that is for this project. Thank you for watching. In the next video, I would be creating a navigation system for the data grid and bind the text boxes to the data. Thank you for watching.